Hello and welcome to an online version of a Public Works presentation about Ide Mill Road. My name is Paul Kurtz and I'm the Interim Director and City Engineer for the Department of Public Works, and I'm here today with Nick Peterson, our Street Design and Construction Division Manager from Public Works. We were hoping we could deliver this presentation to the community and interested parties in person, but given the restrictions in place around the spread of the coronavirus, we feel this is the safest and best technological way to be able to present this information to you. Some might question why we are moving ahead with a virtual presentation now and not just waiting until it's safe to present the information in person to the community. Our answer to that, and as you will see during the presentation, is simply that improvements to Ide Mill Road can't wait any longer. The road is in rough shape and needs attention beyond just normal maintenance and filling of potholes. So our goal is to be able to deliver a project that will improve the condition of Ide Mill Road this coming 2020 construction season. And we need your input and ideas on how best to do that. I encourage you to watch the presentation. It's really not that long, so you get a full understanding of the improvements Public Works is proposing to make, and then we would ask you to answer some questions and provide online feedback at the end of the presentation. The good news with doing an online presentation is that we will be able to reach more folks than we would have at an in-person community meeting, and we think that's a good thing. And just so you know, we will be back with another online meeting in early April to review some of the traffic modeling data that's currently being collected and analyzed. We really want you to better understand where traffic might go as a result of our proposed lane reduction for northbound Ide Mill Road. More information about that meeting will be posted on the Public Works website, so do keep an eye out for that. So again, we want to thank you for taking the time today to watch this presentation and providing us with your thoughts, feedback, and ideas on how we can make our Public Works proposal for improving Ide Mill Road even better. So the purpose for our meeting today is really two. Number one, we want to inform the community about the proposed improvements Public Works is considering for Ide Mill Road. And then number two, we want to take community input and feedback to the proposed improvements. So again, your feedback will be important to us as we move forward. My role in the presentation will be to take us through a little history and background about Ide Mill Road. We think it's important that people have some context and timelines about what's gone on with the corridor to this point. So once I provide you with the background, I will then turn it over to Nick, who will go over the current condition of Ide Mill, give you an indication of some of the maintenance activities that are currently required on the roadway, both in terms of staff time and money spent. He will then go through some design options that we considered, provide you with some information about why we think pedestrian and bicycle facilities are important to implement along the corridor, and lastly, give you the details about the design option and the proposed plan that Public Works is recommending. The final thing we will do then is to highlight what the next steps will be around the community engagement process and how we bring this project through the city approval process so we can get something finally designed yet this year and out to construction. So off on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a map of where Ide Mill Road is located in the city. Interesting to note that Ide Mill Road was actually constructed under a transportation easement that was granted to the city by the Canadian Pacific Railroad. One of the common misconceptions about the corridor, and one of the things we're asked most often, and people assume, is that Ide Mill Road is a MnDOT facility or a state-owned, operated, and maintained facility. It is not. It is actually a city-owned and operated facility. We have designated it as a municipal state aid route. So anything we do to the corridor is at the discretion and under the jurisdiction of the city. As you can see, the roadway was built in the 1960s and opened to traffic in 1965. It's about 1.5 miles in length, extending from Jefferson Avenue on the south end all the way up to Selby Avenue on the north end. The current configuration is 2 lanes south in the southbound direction and 2 lanes in the northbound direction, and it's currently connected to 35E on the south end. The current speed along Ide Mill Road is 45 miles per hour. Many of you may know that we recently reduced speed limits in the city of St. Paul to 25 miles per hour on our minor arterials and collector streets, and we reduced it down to 20 miles per hour in our residential streets. We recognize that Ide Mill is a little bit different roadway in St. Paul. I think the misconception about it being a state facility is that it feels like it is because there are no commercial properties or no businesses along the corridor. So it does feel like an extension of Trunk Highway 35E, and that's why the speed limit is currently at 45 miles per hour. But as part of our improvements out there this coming construction season, we are going to be taking a look at that speed limit and making adjustments accordingly. The average daily traffic along the corridor today is 13,000 vehicles. That happens up on the north end, up around Selby, all the way up to 27,500 vehicles on the south end down by Jefferson. We're often asked, is that a lot of traffic that uses the corridor? So what we've done here is we provided you with some information about some of the corridors around the area to give you kind of an indication of what their traffic volumes are, or their annual average daily traffic is. And you can see Ide Mill kind of compares maybe to a Snelling Avenue, kind of a cross between Snelling Avenue pardon me, and Lexington Avenue as far as roadways around this area. So that kind of gives you an indication of just kind of the volumes we've got in relation to other roadways in the area. And to answer the question, is this a lot of traffic? We might suggest that it really is. So a little bit about the background and history and a timeline of Ide Mill Road. The road was opened back in 1965. And any of you who have some gray hair out there that are watching this and have been in the area for a long time, you probably know this road as the Short Line. So that was what it opened back in 65 under that name, the Short Line. It has since evolved into Ide Mill Road. Don't know a lot of the history about that, but it is currently called the Ide Mill Road. In 1992, it really was a road, before I go to 1992, it really was a road that kind of serviced mainly local trips in the area, and it stayed that way for nearly 30 years. In 1992, a ramp to I-35E was constructed. We opened that ramp for a short period of time, but then it was closed, and that all happened in 1992. In 1999, St. Paul Public Works, at the direction of the administration at that time, was directed to study the road through an environmental impact statement to determine what should be done with the road and how the road should operate. So a community task force was set up, and there were all kinds of meetings had and options discussed about how the roadway should function, or if there should even be a roadway there at all. And that process lasted about 6 years in total. And there was a lot of discussion about what the future of the roadway should be. It ranged all the way from should it be a linear park and not have a roadway there at all the way up to it should be a 4-lane roadway and connected both at the south end of 35E and the north end indirect connection to Trunk Highway 94. In 2002, it was opened. The ramp on the south end of 35E was opened as a test, and it's remained open ever since that time. In 2003, the city did a mill and overlay of the roadway, so it's been 17 years since anything really was done to the roadway to improve it. In 2005, which was really the end of the kind of the environmental impact statement that was done, preferred alternative was submitted by the City of St. Paul and approved by MnDOT and the Federal Highway Administration. That preferred alternative really said there should be a permanent connection between Ide Mill Road and I-35E at the south end and a 4-lane extension to connect to St. Anthony Avenue on the north end, which would then provide an indirect connection to I-94. So that was the alternative, the preferred alternative that came out of the environmental impact statement. And we'll see on the next slide kind of a little history beyond that. In 2009, the City Council passed a resolution, new leadership at the council, and they decided that if any more improvements were to be made along Ide Mill Road, it should be considered then to be brought down to a 2-lane roadway, 1 lane in each direction with a parallel bike and pedestrian trail associated with that. Knowing that, the city, St. Paul Public Works, applied for some federal money to build a trail along Ide Mill Road in 2010. And so we got that federal money and we proceeded to try and do that, although we needed to acquire some more right-of-way from the railroad at that time, and the railroad resisted that. They didn't want to give us any more right-of-way. We actually tried to condemn that land, and the railroad, it ultimately went to court, and the railroad prevailed. So the city had to return the federal funds, and the bike trail wasn't built at that time. In 2015, when we developed our citywide comprehensive bike plan for the city, we did include in there a provision that a trail be considered in the future for that adjacent to the Ide Mill Road corridor. So we talk a little bit about that indirect connection to I-94. That was the preferred alternative back in 2005, and we talk a little bit about why that didn't move forward at that time. And it really boiled down to not having the required funding to be able to make that connection on the north end. There is just a major acquisition of property that would need to be required. We would extend this roadway on the north end from up around Selby where it is today. We would kind of turn the roadway just directly north and head towards I-94. We would have to acquire all those properties along the way as we go towards 94. And then ultimately we would have to put a bridge, build a brand new bridge across I-94 and tie that into St. Anthony. And then from St. Anthony, of course, you could then get on to I-94. So major acquisition of property drove the cost up, major construction activities, not only in building a new roadway, but also in having to build a bridge over 94. The estimated cost to do that back in 2015 to make that north connection to St. Anthony was in the ballpark of $63 million. If we fast forward 5 years to 2020, and we put any kind of inflation, maybe 3 to 5% of inflation factor per year on that, we're probably in the area of $75 million to make that connection today. So that's really why it didn't move forward back in 2005 when that preferred alternative came out. And now we're moving forward with other improvements to the roadway which do not consider a connection to the I-94, or indirect connection, I should say. So with that as background, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Nick now, who is going to go through with you pretty much the technical aspects of the roadway and what it is we're proposing to do from the Department of Public Works in terms of improvements here in 2020.
Thank you, Paul. So again, I'm Nick Peterson, the Division Manager for Street Engineering in St. Paul Public Works. And to begin with the road condition, the existing state of the road, as anyone who has traveled the corridor would be aware, it's not in great condition. And currently it has a score of 10 out of 100 on a scale established originally by the Army Corps of Engineers that we call the Pavement Condition Index. And ultimately that standard was memorialized as a pretty common practice for all entities. So St. Paul uses that, and this road has a score of 10 out of 100 currently. The road is currently surfaced with bituminous, as the road was overlaid in 2003, and that bituminous overlay covered what is underneath, which is concrete dating back to the 1960s. The road has a number of drainage challenges that exist. both along the length of the road, north and south, and also east and west across the road. The road is pretty flat, and so what that means is that drainage has a tough time moving across the road and getting to where it should go, getting into storm drains and getting off the road. So that's a significant challenge that it has, especially given that the roadway has springs that feed water somewhat continuously into the west side of the road today. So what a lot of this means is that the road has maintenance needs today. And Public Works spends a lot of resources on Ide Mill Road every year, roughly $250,000 spent in 2018 alone. Former Director Lantry determined that the city crews spend about 1/3 of their time on Ide Mill instead of addressing potholes elsewhere in the city. On top of the sheer volume of work to be performed as maintenance, the road is busy and fast, making it difficult and rather dangerous for Public Works employees to maintain. Meaning that, as Paul alluded to, it's very important that the road condition be addressed. So, acknowledging that reconstruction would cost a significant sum and that the city does not possess that significant sum, a mill and overlay was sought for the corridor. And what is a mill and overlay? A mill and overlay is a process of removing the top portion of the pavement, judiciously patching problem spots down below that become exposed, and then repaving the road with a new top layer of asphalt. So the top, as we know it today, would be milled off and then overlaid with new asphalt. The mill and overlay was originally conceived in 2018. It was added into the 5-year plan, and the work was scheduled to be done in 2022. However, in 2019, as the condition of the road continued to deteriorate, the mill and overlay work was moved up, and Public Works put into place a plan to try and expedite roadway improvements on Ide Mill as soon as possible. And at that same time, the mayor asked Public Works to analyze a design for non-motorized facilities to be implemented along the corridor consistent with a resolution from 2009. And that resolution called for a combination of a 2-lane roadway with parallel bike and pedestrian facilities. And why are bike improvements along Ide Mill Road important? And why were they included in the 2009 resolution? Indicated in both the city's bike and comp plans, comprehensive plans, it fills an important north-south route. As the map excerpt shows, there is actually a decent amount of east-west mobility provided in the bike network in this area today. However, a north-south gap exists. By default, a bike facility would be considered as a protected facility, separating cars from non-motorized traffic by way of a concrete curb. Such a facility would be safest for all modes by keeping vehicular and non-vehicular users in their assigned spaces. This corridor is expected to serve as part of an extension of the Midtown Greenway, a very heavily used bike corridor in Minneapolis. So, work began in 2019 to implement both the traditional roadway improvements and also the non-motorized components. And Public Works engaged an engineering and design consultant to recommend a cost-effective way to implement all these facilities. And what we've learned from the employment of that consultant is that the corridor has significant drainage problems. It has a need for additional lighting, that nearly 20-year-old temporary traffic signals exist along the corridor that are in need of replacement, and that implementing facilities would require some reconstruction and different alternatives required different amounts of reconstruction. And so the design had to be jumped into and studied in greater detail. So the first alternative that was considered, really by way of the 2009 resolution, was a strict reconfiguration of the corridor with the existing southbound side converted to only be vehicular traffic with one lane of traffic in each direction, with the northbound side then producing really the home for a non-motorized facility. And the non-motorized facility would be built to regional trail standards, so it would be a wide non-motorized facility, and this would create a complete street sort of a configuration that addresses all modes of transportation. That configuration had a price tag of almost $10 million. And what leads to this cost were a number of factors. The intersection reconstruction required to allow for one lane each direction and still allow the corridor to operate required additional costs. So ramps and turn lanes for all the access points are complicated and expensive. Then furthermore, reconfiguration of the roadway requires drainage improvements, meaning that, as I mentioned, the roadway is flat in really both along the length and the cross section of the road, and so that would need to be addressed, and additional storm drains would need to be installed. And then, of course, additional lighting if there is to be a non-motorized facility. Anyone familiar with the corridor would know that it's relatively dark today, and if non-motorized users are introduced into the corridor, lighting should be included in that. So in search of a solution to address these issues, this option was then modified, and some other things that came to light. The concept lacked vehicular separation, meaning that two-way traffic would run unopposed. No median would be between northbound and southbound vehicles. So in search of a safety element and hearing traffic concerns from the public, there was an effort to have a more cost-effective solution that addressed these issues. And so a three-lane configuration was developed whereby southbound Aid Mill would generally stay as is, but northbound would be converted from 2 lanes to only have 1 lane devoted to northbound traffic, with a regional trail type of facility in place of the existing boulevard and the other northbound travel. So as you see in this configuration, there would continue to be 2 lanes southbound. There would be a reduction in northbound lanes to 1 lane, and then a regional trail type of facility would be included also along the northbound side of Ide Mill. This 3-lane configuration has a number of advantages. It still costs more than a traditional mill and overlay, but it also provides important multimodal improvements. The 3-lane configuration requires less reconstruction for turn lanes and ramps. It requires fewer drainage improvements. It still requires additional lighting because of the introduction of non-motorized users in the corridor. And the ramp on the south end of the corridor, Jefferson and 35E area of Ide Mill, would require some adjustment. One of the ramps that folks would use would be converted to non-motorized use only. So that would be the ramp from westbound Jefferson would be converted to non-motorized usage for the trail, and the what I will call the clover leaf off of Jefferson would become the vehicular access point. The 3-lane concept, again, includes lower costs due to less reconstruction, far less reconstruction, but still includes minor lighting and less significant changes to the access points would be required. Now, the 3-lane section has, again, 2 southbound lanes and 1 northbound lane, where southbound has the majority of on and off ramps. So the question likely arises, why is the trail proposed on the east side and not on the west side? And so the reason is because including the trail along the east side of the roadway minimizes conflicts for trail users with those ramps that exist along the corridor. So at Grand Avenue and at St. Clair and so on. So those conflicts disappear, and those conflicts would be higher speed and interactions that would be sort of difficult for the 2 modes to interact because of limited sight distance. So including the trail on the east side is a safer alternative for both modes there by removing those conflicts. It's also, as I mentioned previously, the 3-lane is superior versus the 2-lane proposal because it maintains a median to separate southbound and northbound traffic, vehicular traffic, and reducing the potential for very serious or fatal head-on vehicle crashes. It's also more cost-effective as well because it costs roughly 25% less than the 2-lane option. And while traffic work is currently underway, it stands to reason that the 3-lane should operate more efficiently than the 2-lane. And traffic modeling is underway, but this is where the design team found the most efficient way to balance the various concerns heard during the development process. So now, at this stage, what are the next steps? From a public standpoint, we need some insights, and we'd ask that you complete the online feedback form available. The project team will summarize feedback from the community, hold a community meeting, currently anticipated for Monday, April 6th. It's unclear at this time, as Paul alluded to, that we're in a unique time nationally and locally. So whether that's an in-person or virtual meeting is yet to be determined. And the important thing is that we circle back with the public. The team is currently performing traffic modeling as requested, and then that community meeting would present traffic modeling outcomes and also feedback, what's been digested and summarized and implemented where feasible and reasonable for the project. Currently, a city council meeting is scheduled for April 22nd with a remaining project schedule with bidding happening in early June, work beginning after the 4th of July, and closing out by November 1st of this year. And so at that point, I would thank everyone again for joining us as we work together to implement a multimodal improvement along Ide Mill. Please don't forget to fill out the online comment form prior to the next meeting on April 6th. And we want to thank you again for joining us.